And then in, 1970, two things again happen. I leave Princeton, I take an academic job, and in a couple of years before that, I'd been introduced or reintroduced to ragtime and Scott Joplin. I'd known this music some since I had been maybe an adolescent or even pre-adolescent. I mentioned the early jazz connection, and there I came across some of Joplin. I played it, but of course in a very early jazzish manner with more improvisation, swung rhythms, etc., etc., etc. It was really another close friend of the period, the composer and critic Eric Salzman, now sadly no longer with us, who brought my attention to Joplin again, and with him, William Balcom, who is happily still with us. And Bill and I had come to know each other when I was a Juilliard student, and he was up in Yale, already a graduate composition student. But somehow our paths crossed, I think, through his first wife, who was at Juilliard. Whatever it is, this nexus brought me back to Joplin, and I became utterly there they are, Bill and Joan. Joan was not the right wife at the time, but they're both wonderful people. Bill, whom I sadly have not seen in many years, was again a very magnetic character, wonderful musician. And I became really just tremendously taken up with Joplin. And of course, there I was at a record company, and I was making records for them. So I was able to come to them somewhere roughly the spring of 1970 and say, we really ought to record this music, and I can get the pianist for you cheap. And when they agreed to do this, and to be very honest, I said we ought to do it, and we ought to do it on a classical record label and present it in a certain way, and this was, I think, very different. This is not the way Joplin or ragtime had been known and presented. And fortunately, they liked the idea. They went along with it, and we put it out. I'm not exaggerating here. We put it out in the early autumn of 1970. I had just also moved from New York to the Boston area, where I now became an academic. And as we did with everything at Nonsuch in those days, we simply put it out on the market to die. Nonsuch did zero marketing, zero advertising. At most, they brought new records to people at radio stations. That was it. And to our astonishment, literally to our astonishment, people really started getting excited by this music.
It went viral, to use the modern parlance.
Yes, absolutely. I expected that it would sell a few more copies than my recordings of late 15th century French secular music, which I had done, and which sold a few hundred copies or something like that.
Can you remember the recording session? What was the recording session like? And did you use multiple sessions?
I remember it very vividly. Of course, we used multiple sessions. We had to do many takes of each piece. I worked with this wonderful production team of an engineer named Mark Aubort, Aubort, and sort of producer cum engineer Joanna Nikrens, who, among other things, she's now no longer with us, sadly. I love them both. I think Mark is gone, but I don't know. No, he could hardly be there. Mark J. Aubort, Joanna Nikrens. Joanna's daughter, Erica Nikrens, is a very distinguished pianist. These were wonderful colleagues. Tracy Stern, of course, who was the head of Nonsuch at the time, and played, obviously, really the essential role in getting this done. We recorded in New York City at a church on the Upper West Side at Broadway and 72nd Street, which was a beautiful acoustic, did have the problem that subways ran underneath it. So we would get destroyed by subways. And these were the early days. It was still tape, but they had the Dolby noise reduction system newly introduced. And that meant that we didn't have tape hiss to cover up the subway rumble. So that was a technical challenge that we had to face. Nevertheless, we did it then. This was over the summer, just before I moved up to the Boston area. Mark and Joe were these wonderful producers. And at a certain time, I remember, I wrote liner notes. We insisted that there be a serious looking cover, that there'd be some dignity to this.
Yeah.
And as I say, then it appeared, and it took us all by surprise.
Well, it says here that it sold 100,000 copies in the first year and went to become the first million-selling album for Nonsuch.
I don't think in the first year it sold 100,000. If it sold 1 million eventually, that took quite a few years. I mean, I know I had the royalty statements, and certainly it benefited my financial status. But I can tell you that the earliest royalty statements may have been in the low 5 figures, nothing like 100,000 copies. In fact, I can remember that later, after I left Nonsuch and was recording for Decca in the UK, my producer there, who had been a producer in New York for a long time at CBS and whom I had gotten to know there, once said to me, if you'd recorded that for CBS, it would have sold 1 million. And I said to him at the time, yeah, but if I'd recorded that for CBS, I never would have recorded it. They wouldn't have done it.
Right.
Really, it took Nonsuch to do it. So, but yes, it did, whatever the exact figures. I suppose if I went back through all my royalty statements, I could add it up, but I've never felt inclined to do that. It certainly did well, and it spawned 2 successor albums.
So just really quickly before we go to the number of singers in a chorus, in January of 1971, Harold C. Schoenberg, very influential figure, wrote a nice article in the New York Times telling scholars, get busy on Scott Joplin. So how did you react? I mean, just in one moment, you're recording in a church, there's the subway going, you think, like you said, the record is going out to die, you're not expecting much. Then it's selling hundreds, thousands of copies, and now influential figures. What was the mood like at that time? What were you thinking?
I knew Harold Schoenberg, by the way. He was an acquaintance of my father, so we'd known each other since I was an early teenager. I think again, it was heady. He wasn't the only one. As I say, there really was this groundswell. Record magazines were right. I was being approached to do concerts, this and that. I should say, by the way, that this was also not in and of itself something new in this respect. Already the jug band had quite a success. In 1965, when I came to when I had already been at a record company, we did a recording of, it was called a Baroque Beatles book, that turned Beatles songs into authentic Baroque music, and that was a bestseller. Then, right in the wake of that, I had recorded as an arranger with Judy Collins, and we had gold record albums, and so and I was already known for this. So in a way, in those days, I was not unknown. So when the Joplin came, you could say it was more of the same, just pushing it to a different level. Just as, I'll get ahead slightly, in 1973, when the film The Sting was made.
I was just about to mention that, yes.
Well, just very quickly, I can say that George Roy Hill, the director of the film, in fact, asked me to do the music, but for various reasons, I did not. I didn't. It's not. I didn't accept the offer, as it were. And as I said at the time, look, we had been numbers 1 and 2 on the classical charts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was already, famous, celebrated. But this made it ridiculous. It pushed it to yet another level. But it's a terrible thing to say, but I was sort of accustomed to a measure of celebrity, fame. I mean, yeah. Now maybe
Right,
I'm
right.
totally obscure, but these were different times. That's a long time ago. So there you go.
Just to
Uh,
end the
yeah,
section on Scott Joplin,
yeah.
what are your top three of his compositions that are special to you?
Oh dear, that's very hard. That is hard to say because I love them all, and I love most the one I'm playing at the moment. I suppose I'd have to include. I won't say these are the top three, but off the bat, I could name Solace,
Oh,
uh,
Solace, yeah.
Magnetic Rag, and one. I don't know which I'd come up with. Let's say there and just about anything else. I mean, Scott
Mm.
Joplin is a wonderful composer.
He's a
This also
genius.
he is a genius, and this
Yeah.
also had an influence on me. He wrote this really beautiful, exquisite music. And he is clearly a thinking musician. I mean, I love Joplin as a man, as a human
Yeah.
being, even beyond him as a composer. It's both, So Joplin also, yes, he had a tremendous effect on my life. No, so
What
let's
did
say,
you make of his? I
yeah,
have to include this. What did you make of? I talked to a scholar, Philip Terita from Germany, and he talked
yes.
about Scott Joplin owning a copy of Salomon Yaddison's counterpoint treatise and was heavily annotated, apparently. So, does that surprise you, or his training?
It does not. Joplin studied, he had some formal training, maybe not extensive, but he studied with, and I haven't checked the newer literature on this, but, an immigrant German music teacher
Mm,
in Sedalia, Missouri, where he was growing up. Texarkana. And then in Sedalia, he attended classes at a college for Black students and studied music there. He certainly is musically literate. He could read. He could clearly arrange. The choral writing in Tremonisha, for example, up to 8 voices, is immensely skillful. It doesn't just sound beautiful. It's written by somebody who really knows how to make the music sound and really knows how to engineer the notes on paper. So you're dealing with a musician of indeed considerable sophistication that he would have carefully studied counterpoint. Joplin is, in the best sense, an aspirational character, and he is always clearly pushing himself and learning. I mean, that's any artist is. The
mm,
Beatles were, Mozart was, Beethoven was. You're always looking for more. You're always looking to go beyond. I mean, you may not even be consciously looking, even knowing that you're doing it, but that's what you're doing. And that's what
mm.
Joplin did. So Joplin had an immense impact there. I will mention one last thing on Joplin, and that a few years ago, I was contacted by the very prestigious German music publisher G. Henle. They're the people who put
Mm.
out sort of the standard
The
edition
Urtext,
of
yes, yes.
Urtext of Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, these very, very sober
Mm.
blue covers their things
Yes.
have. And they have asked me if I would do an edition of Scott Joplin for them. I haven't yet come to do it. I hope that I'll be able to come to do it in the next couple of years. The last I knew, the project is still alive. And of course, I feel that as an obligation, and that would be a lovely way to. I still do play the music sometime, but also to round out, in a sense, my engagement with Joplin and really give back to him
Mm.
something. And the thought of Joplin in Henle's beautiful blue color covers next to Beethoven and Schubert and Chopin is immensely gratifying. Okay.
Yes.